You have heard the name of Malcolm Gladwell, haven't you? He's a writer and an author, and his first book was called The Tipping Point, in which he tries to lay out a plan of action for people like you and I, let's say who are interested in creating a social change. And I hope you are too. And today I'm not going to talk about this book. I'm going to talk about one of other works of his, which is called Blink. And before I talk about that book in particular, let's just see what Malcolm Gladwell does in his works. He tries to understand the psychology of human mind, how it works, and he sees some really big implications in the real world. And that's really the idea behind most of his works, that how the small psychological things can literally affect or shape the whole world. And Blink, although is a very different book from The Tipping Point, the idea is very much still the same, the fundamental idea. And the idea behind the book called Blink is, which is also its subtitle, it says, the power of thinking without thinking. That is, he talks about the power of intuition. And he tells us how so many decisions in our life, although we pretend that we are taking hours and hours of thinking and rational discussions to come to a conclusion, to make a choice, but he says so often in almost all the cases we are relying on our intuition, the first impression that has been made in our mind. And we stick to that in a lot of cases. So he starts the book by telling us different stories in which this intuition has been of great help. In fact, more powerful than all the knowledge and wisdom of the experts combined. So he talks about one artwork where some people felt that there was something wrong with it and the museum shouldn't acquire it. But the more they researched and the more they explored and did all the studies on it, the more they were convinced that it was a real work of art and not any forgery. But yet, in some people's mind, there was this feeling that it just didn't feel right. And eventually what happens is, it turns out to be right. And he tells us about a lot of scientific studies where this is very effective. One of the studies he talks about is in a lab you see video clips of some couples who are having general conversations about dogs, about their food, just normal day-to-day conversations. And through that study, it was found that if you observe those conversations for 10 to 15 minutes carefully, you could pretty much tell with almost 90 to 95% accuracy that whether this couple would be together after 15 or 20 years or not, or would they separate. That's a really, really powerful tool to have. But we all kind of ignore it. We don't really talk about it. We don't really think about it. But something if just feels right or feels wrong, it can really be a powerful tool. But this is not it. Malcolm Gladwell goes to the other side also. He also talks about the limitations of it. And we can limit our judgment by the first impression, by our intuition. So he talks about one story where a few white police officers in US, they saw a black African man who was just standing outside his house, not doing anything, simply standing there. But to these policemen, somehow he looked suspicious. and they stopped their vehicle right outside his house. And one of them said that black guy, he looks like a criminal, some criminal, he couldn't remember, but he just felt something was wrong with this guy. So a couple of them, they try to approach that black man, and what happens is he gets uncomfortable because he does not speak English very well, and he's curious about them, that what they are doing here, but he's also a bit hesitant. So they ask him to show his hands, and he just doesn't understand it, and he tries to reach out to his pocket and tries to take something out. And the police officers, they felt that it's the gun that he's trying to take out. And before he could do anything, they shoot him. And it's only when they've shot him multiple times do they reach out to his body and check what he was trying to pull out. And it was his wallet. He didn't have a gun. He didn't have any bad intentions. But because of these white police officers' bias towards black people, this man was killed. So that's a really sad story. In the same stories, Gladwell tells us about different things. For example, for a long time in European history, women were not allowed to participate in orchestra or play musical instruments. And the bias of these people who were in this industry was so strict that when they had some kind of blind auditions where they could not see who was playing it, they selected a woman and then eventually denied her entry. And then they came up with some ridiculous excuses that woman can't hold a instrument properly, she can't carry that weight, and all those excuses, but all because of the superficial intuition that you have. So that's what the author tries to tell us here. That intuition and the power of intuitive thinking, it's a really powerful tool. It's a wonderful journey to our unconscious. But it has both its sides, positive sides and negative sides. It can go perfectly right, it can go horribly wrong. But the idea here is that whatever choices we are making, are we aware in that moment that it is not our bias? Or let's say if it is a bias, what kind of bias it is? Can we articulate it? And once we can understand and articulate our biases, we can make much better choices and remove the errors in our judgment. So this book is really about all these moments in our lives when we make our choices and we don't know why. And as Malcolm Gladwell shows, we don't even need to know why in all the cases. We can trust our instincts, but at the same time we can be a little cautious, and we can find out ways in which the kind of information we require to make a decision. We don't need all the information in the world. We just need certain tools to figure out how to make a choice and how we can leverage our power of intuition to make a better choice. So it's definitely worth reading, and it definitely impacts the way you think and the way you make your choices.